Dinton and Melbourne Yards are where most goods trains terminate, before being sent out to different locations around the country. In this week's video, we'll be talking about everything you need to know about Dinton and Melbourne Yards. Dinton Yards. Established in the 1950s, the yards are split in two, separated by Dinton Road, hence the name. These two halves are called North Dinton, north of Dinton Road, and South Dinton, south of Dinton Road. These yards were built on reclaimed swamplands, which I don't think climate activists would care much about. Dinton North Yard is located next to South Kensington Railway Station. Cube trains run from here, spelled Q-U-B-E. The terminal includes both standard and broad gauge track, and they can be accessed through this flat junction at South Kensington. South Dinton Yards are much more interesting. It's the main intermodal freight facility in Melbourne. It's located between Dinton and Footscray Roads. It's operated by Pacific National, which runs freight trains all over Australia. The yard is also blessed with standard gauge access, and the fabled South Dinton Loco Works. Melbourne Yards. Moving east of the Moonee Ponds Creek, Melbourne Yards are the oldest freight terminal in Victoria. They spread westwards from Southern Cross and North Melbourne, and continued growing rapidly throughout the late 1800s. Goods sheds were erected for unloading freight, with 5 in total. However, by the 1920s, Melbourne Yards were getting overrun, so Tottenham Yards were built west of Footscray. They were used for sorting trains which weren't going to the east of Victoria. In the 1960s, for greater efficiency, the yard was rearranged. With these upgrades, a hub yard was also built, which opened a year later, in 1970. Like steam engines, the yard quickly got outdated, as containerization was becoming much more popular, so the yard was quickly replaced by Dinton Yards. The precinct lay abandoned until the land was repurposed into what is today Docklands, which I have talked about in a different video. The Docklands redevelopment project basically removed all trace of the yards besides a couple of sidings and the number 2 goods shed. Today, the yard survives as a couple of V-Line stabling facilities and sidings next to North Melbourne. Tottenham Yards. Land for Tottenham Yards was acquired by Victorian Railways in 1912. However, the yard's first purpose was actually a place to dump waste from the South Yarra to Caulfield grade separations. The yards were finally built in the Roaring '20s as a part of a project to relieve stress on Melbourne Yards, as trains needed to be remarshalled at Melbourne Yards, causing long wait times. With the addition of this yard, trains can be remarshalled at Tottenham Yard and then be sent to Melbourne Yards. The yard is entirely broad gauge, but traffic has been slowed ever since the line out west was converted to standard gauge. Currently, the yard is mostly used for wagon storage. The yard is on a slight slope from Sunshine to the city, known as a gravitational yard. South Dinton Loco Works. Opened in 1961 by Victorian Railways as a dedicated workshop to maintain and store the new diesel locomotives. It replaced the old North Melbourne Loco Depot, east of the Moonee Ponds Creek. South Dinton Loco Depot has the capabilities to service both standard and broad gauge locomotives. This is done by having both a broad gauge and a standard gauge turntable, and mostly dual gauge trackage. When V-Line Freight was sold to Freight Victoria in the 1990s, South Dinton Loco Works was included in that sale as a lease. Then the lease was passed on to Pacific National when Freight Victoria, renamed to Freight Australia, was bought out in 2004. Downer Rail operated some of the roads of the depot until Pacific National moved to Spotswood in 2016. Bombardier took over roads 1 to 4 and the nearby fueling depot in 2010. In 2019, V-Line took lease of roads 2 to 6 to store inner peak stock, sharing with Bombardier. In 2021, with a rundown facility, the depot was given a light refurbishment to only roads 6 through 8, mainly for maintaining the new standard gauge velocities. This meant converting roads 6 and 7 to dual gauge. However, road 8 stayed exactly the same. Bombardier will soon be bought out by Alstom, which means the entire facility will be upgraded, which it sorely needs. Port Melbourne. Built in the 1960s along with the development of the docks in that area, the sidings served both Swanston docks east and west, allowing intermodal containers between rail and sea. However, they were removed sometimes in the late 80s, and they were only restored in the early 2000s, where they were also extended to be 1.5 kilometers long. In the 2000 harvest, Appleton Dock reopened, only to serve the large amount of grain exports coming in by rail. With these port upgrades, most of the sidings were also converted to dual gauge. The Westgate Port sidings at Victoria Docks opened in 2009 to serve containerized paper coming from Maryvale in Gippsland. They are a pair of sidings, one being 580 meters long and the other being 650 meters long. The sidings also feature a runaround loop. We can't talk about Port Melbourne without one of its fallen lines. The Webb Dock line opened in 1986 to link Webb Dock and West Melbourne Yard. The line was closed in 1992 as some bends were far too sharp for the line to be used by goods trains. The line was also closed to enable the development of docklands. 2 rail cameras were installed by Railpage in 2011 to monitor trains coming in and out of Melbourne's freight facilities. The cameras are located just off Bunbury Street Tunnel. The footage is actually public and you can find them online. I'll leave a link in the description below. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked this video about Melbourne's main freight precinct. I know there are a couple other sidings and yards around Melbourne, but I didn't want to include them in this video. I might make a video on them in the future. If you have any suggestions on what video I should do next, then leave a comment below. If not, I'll see you later.